You ever notice how some people think a uniform gives them the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't? The question hung quietly in the cool morning air of Riverside Memorial Park as the first light of the sun stretched across the wide walking paths and trimmed lawns. It was a calm Saturday, the kind of morning when the city felt softer, when joggers moved at an easy pace and elderly couples walked their small dogs beneath tall maple trees. Near the center of the park sat a simple wooden bench facing a small open field where dozens of gray pigeons gathered like regulars at a familiar cafe. On that bench sat Marcus Bennett, a tall, silver-haired man in a faded navy windbreaker and worn brown loafers, carefully tearing pieces from a small paper bag of bread. Each motion was slow and patient, the way someone moves when they've done the same quiet ritual for years. He tossed a few crumbs onto the grass, and the birds fluttered closer, their wings rustling softly against the morning breeze. Some landed near his feet, while others circled overhead before settling down. A young couple walking past smiled at the peaceful scene, but the moment didn't last long. The low hum of a patrol car rolling along the park road interrupted the calm, its tires crunching over gravel before stopping just a few yards away. A door opened. Footsteps followed. Officer Ryan Carter stepped out, adjusting the dark blue collar of his uniform as he scanned the park like someone already expecting trouble. He was in his early 30s, tall, confident, the kind of officer who carried himself like every situation was a test of authority. His eyes quickly landed on Marcus and the small gathering of birds. For a moment he simply watched, arms crossed, as another handful of crumbs scattered across the grass. The pigeons flapped excitedly, their wings briefly filling the air with soft gray motion. Then Ryan walked closer. His shadow stretched across the ground until it reached the bench. "Sir," he said, his voice firm enough to make a few nearby walkers glance over. "You know feeding wildlife in city parks can cause problems, right?" Marcus didn't react immediately. Instead, he finished tearing one last piece of bread and tossed it gently forward. The birds hopped closer, pecking quietly at the ground. Only then did he look up. His eyes were calm, steady, the kind of gaze that had seen decades of mornings just like this one. "Good morning, officer," Marcus replied, his voice warm and measured. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Ryan didn't smile. He shifted his weight slightly, glancing down at the bread bag in Marcus's hands before looking back toward the birds. A jogger slowed nearby, pretending to stretch while listening. Another man walking his golden retriever paused at the edge of the path. Moments like this had a way of drawing quiet attention. "I'm going to have to ask you to stop feeding them," Ryan continued, a little louder now, as if the small audience justified a stronger tone. Marcus looked out across the grass where the pigeons moved in gentle circles, completely unaware of the tension building behind them. The breeze carried the faint smell of fresh-cut grass and distant coffee from a nearby cafe. "These birds have been coming here longer than I have," Marcus said calmly. "Seems like they expect breakfast by now." A couple of the onlookers chuckled softly, but Ryan didn't appreciate the humor. His jaw tightened just slightly. "Sir, I'm serious. I need you to put the food away." Marcus studied the officer for a moment, the way someone does when deciding whether a situation requires patience or explanation. Around them, the park continued its slow morning rhythm, but the small circle of attention was growing. Phones appeared quietly in a few hands. Ryan noticed. His posture stiffened, sensing the subtle pressure of being watched. Marcus then folded the top of the paper bag and rested it beside him on the bench. The pigeons shuffled closer, waiting. For a brief second, the park felt unusually quiet. Ryan took another step forward, unaware that the peaceful man on the bench was far more familiar with uniforms, authority, and the weight of public eyes than he could possibly imagine. Marcus Bennett rested his hands lightly on the top of his wooden cane, not because he needed it to stand, but because it had become part of his quiet morning routine, something steady to hold while the city slowly woke around him. The pigeons continued pecking at the crumbs scattered across the grass, their small feet shuffling through the thin layer of dew that still clung to the ground. Officer Ryan Carter watched the birds with visible irritation, as though the entire scene had somehow become a challenge to his authority. The sunlight was climbing higher now, reflecting softly off the glass windows of the apartment buildings that bordered the park. A few more people had slowed their pace nearby. Some pretended to check messages on their phones while others simply lingered beside the walking path, sensing that something uncomfortable was unfolding. Ryan cleared his throat and straightened his shoulders, his duty belt shifting slightly as he adjusted his stance. "Sir, I already asked you once," he said, keeping his voice controlled but firm. "Feeding wildlife attracts more birds, which leads to sanitation problems for the city. I need you to pack up the food." Marcus looked down toward the grass again, where two pigeons briefly flapped their wings while competing for the same crumb. The scene seemed almost peaceful despite the tension, standing only a few feet away. He took a slow breath, the kind of breath someone takes when patience has been practiced for many years. "Officer," Marcus replied calmly, "these birds have been part of this park longer than most of us. They come here every morning. Same time, same bench." Ryan frowned slightly. "That may be true, but that does not change the rules." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if he respected the concept of rules more than Ryan realized. "Rules matter," he said quietly. "They keep things fair." The officer tilted his head, uncertain whether the comment was agreement or subtle resistance. A woman walking her small terrier paused 10 feet away, pretending to tie her shoe while listening. A young man sitting on a nearby bench had already lifted his phone slightly, the camera pointed carefully in their direction. Ryan noticed the attention growing and felt the subtle pressure that came with an audience. He stepped closer to the bench. "I am going to need to see some identification," he said. The tone of his voice had shifted again, more official now, the way officers speak when they decide to move a situation forward. Marcus did not react immediately. Instead, he leaned slightly forward and brushed a few loose crumbs from his palm. The pigeons gathered quickly, their feathers rustling softly as they moved. For several seconds, he simply watched them. Then he lifted his eyes back toward Ryan. "You must be fairly new to this district," Marcus said gently. Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "By the comment. What makes you say that?" Marcus gave a faint smile, the kind that carried more observation than humor. "I spent many mornings in this park over the years," he said. "You learn to recognize the officers who patrol here." Ryan crossed his arms. "Well, I have been assigned here for about 6 months, if that is what you are asking." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the information. 6 months, he repeated quietly. "That explains it." Ryan's expression tightened. "Explains what exactly?" Marcus reached down beside him and picked up the folded paper bag, holding it loosely between his fingers. The pigeons waited, tilting their small heads as if expecting more crumbs. The park had grown noticeably quieter now. Conversations nearby had softened, and the faint sound of a passing bus on the distant street seemed unusually loud in the pause between them. Marcus studied the officer's face for a moment, calm and composed, as though measuring the weight of the moment before choosing his next words. "Experience has a way of changing how you see things," he said at last, "especially when it comes to this job." Ryan exhaled through his nose, clearly impatient. "Sir, I am not here for a lecture. Identification, please." Marcus slowly reached toward the inside pocket of his windbreaker, his movements unhurried and deliberate, while the pigeons waited on the grass, and the growing circle of quiet observers leaned just a little closer to see what would happen next. Marcus Bennett moved slowly as he reached into the inside pocket of his windbreaker, not with the nervous hesitation of someone afraid, but with the calm precision of a man who had performed this simple motion thousands of times across a lifetime. The quiet rustle of fabric sounded unusually loud in the still morning air. Officer Ryan Carter watched closely, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he expected resistance, but Marcus showed none. Around them, the small gathering of onlookers had grown just a little larger. A jogger had stopped completely now, stretching beside the path, while pretending not to stare. The young man with the phone adjusted his position for a clearer angle. Even the woman with the terrier had straightened up, her leash hanging loosely while the small dog sniffed the grass, unaware of the tension unfolding just a few yards away. Marcus pulled out a worn leather wallet, the kind that had softened with age and years of use. The edges were smooth and slightly faded, the stitching along one corner beginning to loosen after decades of being opened and closed. He held it for a moment before opening it, glancing down as if confirming something only he could see. The pigeons shuffled closer, their small heads tilting curiously while they waited for more crumbs that had not yet come. Ryan shifted his stance again, impatience creeping into his posture. "Sir, I do not have all morning," he said, his voice carrying a sharper edge now that several people were clearly watching. Marcus looked up calmly. "Patience is a valuable skill in this line of work, officer," he replied. Ryan frowned slightly at the remark. "This line of work?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he flipped open the wallet slowly, the leather creasing as it unfolded. Inside were several cards tucked neatly into their slots. A few photographs rested behind a clear plastic sleeve, their colors faded by time. One picture showed a younger Marcus standing beside two smiling children in front of a small brick house. Another captured a group of uniformed officers gathered around a patrol car, their arms resting on each other's shoulders in the relaxed pride of a team that had spent years working side by side. Marcus paused for a second while looking at that photo, a quiet memory passing through his eyes before he closed the sleeve again. Ryan cleared his throat, his patience thinning as the moment stretched longer. "Identification," he repeated. Marcus nodded gently, as though the reminder had been expected. He slid one card halfway out but stopped just before removing it completely. His gaze lifted again toward the officer. "Tell me something, Ryan," Marcus said. Ryan blinked. "How do you know my name?" Marcus gave a small smile. "Your name tag," he said simply. Ryan glanced down reflexively at the silver lettering above his chest pocket before quickly looking back up. "Right," he said stiffly. Marcus rested the open wallet against his palm while the breeze moved softly through the park trees overhead. "How long have you been wearing that badge?" Marcus asked. Ryan hesitated for a moment before answering. "Almost 3 years." Marcus nodded slowly, as if calculating something in his mind. 3 years, he repeated quietly. "That is still early in a career." Ryan crossed his arms again. "I am not sure what that has to do with anything, sir." Marcus finally slid the card free from the wallet and held it between his fingers. He did not hand it over yet. Instead, he studied the young officer's face with a steady gaze that carried a strange mixture of patience and quiet authority. The pigeons rustled their wings across the grass as a breeze passed through the park, lifting a few loose crumbs into the air. In the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, its deep tone rolling gently across the quiet paths. Several of the observers leaned forward slightly, sensing that something important was about to happen. Marcus lifted the card just enough for Ryan to see the edge of the metal seal reflecting sunlight. "You see, officer," Marcus said calmly. 3 years is just enough time to learn the rules." He paused for a moment before continuing. "But sometimes it takes a lot longer to understand the responsibility that comes with wearing that uniform." Ryan's expression hardened, unsure whether he was being lectured or challenged. "Sir, if you are refusing to provide identification, I will need to." Marcus finally extended the card forward. Ryan reached out automatically, his fingers closing around it while the small circle of onlookers watched in silence. For a moment, the officer only glanced down casually, expecting nothing unusual. But as his eyes moved across the surface of the identification, the confident tension in his posture began to change in a way that no one around them could miss. Ryan Carter remained standing beside the bench, but the energy around him had changed in a way that even he could feel. Only a few minutes earlier, he had approached with the certainty of someone convinced he was correcting a problem. Now the quiet space between him and Marcus Bennett carried a different weight. Marcus slipped the worn leather wallet back into the inside pocket of his windbreaker with the same calm precision he had shown throughout the entire encounter. The pigeons had nearly finished the crumbs scattered across the grass, and were now wandering slowly across the open patch of lawn, their wings occasionally lifting in soft bursts of gray motion. The park breeze moved gently through the branches above them, carrying the distant sound of a passing car and the faint laughter of children from a playground across the street. Ryan cleared his throat, but the words he had been ready to say earlier no longer felt appropriate. For a moment, he simply stood there, adjusting his stance as if searching for the balance he had lost. The small group of onlookers remained nearby, pretending to mind their own business, while their attention stayed fixed on the bench. Marcus rested both hands lightly on the top of his cane again, his posture relaxed, his expression unchanged. There was no sign of triumph in his face, no hint of anger or satisfaction, just patience. After a few seconds, Ryan finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "I was not aware," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "that you had served in the department." Marcus looked up at him with the same steady gaze that had never once shown discomfort. That happens sometimes, he replied. People see what they expect to see. Ryan shifted slightly, the leather of his duty belt creaking again as he moved. He glanced briefly toward the stone memorial standing in the center of the park. Earlier it had meant nothing to him, just another park feature he passed during patrol. Now he wondered how many times he had walked by it without noticing the names engraved on its plaque. Marcus followed his glance again, but said nothing. The silence stretched comfortably this time. The tension that had drawn attention from the nearby walkers had begun to dissolve into something quieter, something closer to reflection. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck lightly, a small gesture that betrayed the uncertainty he was trying to hide. You said earlier that experience changes how you see things, he said. Marcus nodded once. It does, he answered, especially in this profession. Ryan looked down at the ground for a moment, watching one stubborn pigeon circle the bench as if hoping for a final crumb. I thought I was just enforcing the rules, Ryan admitted. Marcus gave a small, thoughtful smile. Rules matter, he said again. But the reason behind them matters too. Ryan lifted his eyes again, listening more carefully now. Marcus leaned back slightly on the bench, the sunlight catching the silver in his hair. When you spend enough years wearing that badge, Marcus continued, you start to realize that the uniform is not about control. It is about responsibility. Ryan did not interrupt. Marcus gestured lightly toward the open park around them. A police officer is supposed to protect the peace of a place like this, he said. Not disturb it when there is no harm being done. Ryan absorbed the words quietly. They did not sound like criticism. They sounded more like advice that had been given many times before. Around them the park had slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The jogger began moving again along the path. The woman with the terrier continued her walk. Even the young man with the phone had lowered it completely, sensing that the moment had turned into something more thoughtful than dramatic. Ryan exhaled slowly and straightened his shoulders again, but this time the posture looked less like authority and more like reflection. I appreciate your service, Chief Bennett, he said finally. The title came naturally now, without hesitation. Marcus nodded gently in acknowledgement. Neither man spoke for another moment. The pigeons fluttered once more before settling again near the bench, and the quiet morning sun continued to climb over Riverside Memorial Park. The quiet morning sunlight continued to spread across Riverside Memorial Park, warming the wooden bench where Marcus Bennett remained seated while the last of the pigeons wandered across the grass in slow circles. The tension that had drawn the attention of nearby walkers had almost completely faded, replaced by the soft rhythm of an ordinary Saturday morning returning to life. Officer Ryan Carter stood beside the bench with a posture that looked different now, less rigid, less certain, as though the conversation had shifted something deeper than a simple misunderstanding. For a few moments neither man spoke. The breeze moved through the trees again, carrying the faint scent of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe 2 blocks away. Somewhere across the park a bicycle rolled past on the paved path, its tires humming softly against the concrete. Marcus looked out over the open field where the pigeons were slowly drifting toward another patch of grass, searching for whatever crumbs remained. You know, Marcus said calmly after a while, this park was not always this quiet. Ryan glanced at him, curious now rather than defensive. What do you mean, sir? Marcus rested his hands together on the top of his cane. 20 years ago this place had more patrol cars than picnic blankets, he said with a faint smile. Ryan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Marcus continued, his voice steady and reflective. There was a time when the neighborhood around here struggled. Businesses were closing. Families were moving away. People stopped coming to the park because they did not feel safe walking these paths. Ryan listened closely, realizing that he was hearing part of a story that had unfolded long before he joined the department. Marcus gestured gently toward the walking trail. We worked for years to change that, he said. Officers walked the neighborhood every day. We talked with store owners. We listened to the families who lived nearby. Ryan followed Marcus's gaze along the quiet trail. It was difficult to imagine the peaceful park as a troubled place. Marcus continued speaking, not with pride, but with the calm tone of someone remembering work that had once mattered deeply. Little by little the community came back, Marcus said. Children started playing here again. People began jogging in the mornings. Couples walked their dogs without worrying about who might be waiting around the corner. Ryan looked around the park more carefully now, noticing details that had seemed ordinary earlier. The clean pathways, the well-maintained grass, the relaxed expressions of the people passing through. Marcus gave a soft nod toward the stone memorial near the center of the park. That monument was placed there when the neighborhood finally turned around, he said. Ryan glanced at it again. I have passed it many times during patrol, he admitted. Marcus smiled gently. Most people do. Ryan shifted slightly, the quiet humility in his expression becoming more visible. I suppose I never stopped to read it. Marcus's eyes remained on the monument for a moment before returning to Ryan. Policing is not just about enforcing rules, Marcus said calmly. It is about understanding the people you serve. Ryan absorbed the words without interrupting. Marcus continued. Sometimes the easiest thing for an officer to do is to assume the worst about someone they do not know. Ryan lowered his gaze briefly, the truth of the statement landing quietly. Marcus did not accuse him. His tone never changed. But when you slow down and really look at a person, Marcus said, you often discover a story you did not expect. The breeze moved through the park again, lifting a few leaves from the grass and sending them drifting across the path. Ryan watched them for a moment before looking back at Marcus. You come here every morning? He asked. Marcus nodded. Almost every day, he replied. Ryan glanced again at the pigeons still wandering near the bench. And the birds. Marcus gave a quiet chuckle. They have very good memories. Ryan finally allowed a small smile to appear. The tension that had once defined the encounter had fully transformed into something else now, something calmer and more reflective. The park around them continued to move forward with the simple peace of an ordinary morning. But for Ryan Carter, the moment had already begun to change how he would see the uniform he wore from that day forward. Ryan Carter remained standing near the bench, but the conversation had shifted something inside him that he could not easily ignore. The calm authority in Marcus Bennett's voice carried the weight of decades spent wearing the same uniform Ryan now wore, and for the first time since stepping out of his patrol car that morning, Ryan felt less like the officer in charge and more like a young man still learning what the badge truly meant. The park around them had fully returned to its peaceful rhythm. A pair of elderly men played chess at a small table near the walking path. A mother pushed a stroller past the open lawn while her toddler pointed excitedly at the pigeons wandering across the grass. The tension that had once drawn attention was now gone, leaving behind a quiet moment of reflection that only Ryan seemed to fully feel. Marcus leaned forward slightly and reached into the folded paper bag beside him. There were only a few crumbs left. He scattered them gently across the grass in front of the bench. The pigeons moved in again with soft fluttering wings, their gray feathers catching the sunlight as they circled the final bits of bread. Ryan watched them for a moment before speaking again. Did you patrol this area yourself back then? He asked. Marcus nodded slowly. Many times, he said. I walked these paths long before that monument was placed out there. Ryan followed his gaze again toward the stone memorial in the middle of the park. The bronze plaque shimmered faintly in the sunlight, but the words engraved into it were still too far away to read from where he stood. Marcus noticed his curiosity. You should take a moment to read it sometime, he said gently. Ryan gave a small thoughtful nod. I think I will. Marcus rested his hands on his cane again and studied the young officer quietly. Tell me something, Ryan, he said after a moment. Ryan looked back toward him. Yes, sir. Marcus's expression remained calm but thoughtful. Why did you decide to become a police officer? The question caught Ryan slightly off guard. He shifted his weight and glanced briefly toward the path where a few joggers were passing by. I guess I always wanted to help people, he said after a pause. Marcus nodded slowly, as if the answer was familiar. That is usually where the journey begins, he said. Ryan looked at the older man more carefully now. And you? Ryan asked. What made you start? Marcus smiled faintly, his eyes drifting across the park as if he were looking through time instead of space. When I was a young man, he said quietly, my neighborhood did not always trust the police. Ryan listened closely. Marcus continued. I believe the best way to change that was to become part of the system and help it improve. Ryan absorbed the words in silence. Marcus glanced toward the monument once more. Over the years, many officers gave everything they had to protect this city, he said. Some of them are remembered on that plaque. Ryan looked toward the monument again, this time with deeper curiosity. Were you close with any of them? Marcus's expression softened slightly. A few, he replied. The breeze moved gently through the park trees again, carrying the quiet sound of rustling leaves. Ryan felt the weight of the moment more clearly now. The man sitting on the bench was not just a retired officer. He was someone who had spent decades shaping the department Ryan had only recently joined. Ryan looked down at the badge pinned to his chest for a moment, the metal catching the sunlight just as the identification card had earlier. I think I still have a lot to learn, Ryan said quietly. Marcus gave a warm nod. That realization is the first step, he replied. The pigeons lifted suddenly into the air in a soft cloud of wings before settling again near the far side of the grass. Ryan watched them drift across the field, and for the first time that morning he saw the park not as a place to patrol, but as a community that had been carefully protected long before his arrival. Standing beside the bench, he realized that the simple moment he had almost dismissed had quietly become one of the most important lessons of his young career. Ryan Carter stood quietly beside the bench, watching the pigeons drift across the lawn as if they had never been interrupted at all. The moment that had begun with tension now carried a calm weight that settled deeper with every passing second. The sunlight had climbed higher above Riverside Memorial Park, warming the brick walkway and casting longer shadows beneath the tall maple trees that lined the open field. The park was fully alive now. Joggers passed along the paved trail. A father lifted his young daughter so she could watch the birds fluttering near the grass. Conversations floated softly through the air like distant music. Yet for Ryan, the world seemed slower, as though the quiet conversation with Marcus Bennett had shifted the way he saw everything around him. Marcus reached down and folded the empty paper bag carefully, pressing the creases flat before placing it beside him on the bench. The pigeons had finished the last crumbs and were beginning to scatter toward other parts of the park, their wings lifting in gentle bursts of motion that caught the sunlight like silver flashes. Ryan studied the older man for a moment before speaking again. Chief Bennett, he said respectfully, the title sounding more natural now than it had only minutes earlier. Marcus turned his head slightly. Yes, Ryan. The way Marcus said his name carried no judgment, only calm recognition. Ryan hesitated for a moment as if choosing his words carefully. Earlier this morning, he began slowly. I approached you assuming something about the situation without really understanding it. Marcus listened quietly, his expression unchanged. Ryan continued, his voice steady but thoughtful. I believed I was doing my job, but I did not take the time to see the whole picture. Marcus nodded gently. That happens more often than you might think, he replied. Ryan looked down briefly at the badge on his uniform before lifting his eyes again. I should have approached the moment differently, he said, and I would like to apologize for the way I handled it. The words were simple, but they carried sincerity. Marcus studied the young officer for a moment, the calm lines of his face softening slightly. An apology shows strength, Marcus said quietly, especially when someone is willing to learn from the moment. Ryan felt a quiet sense of relief settle in his chest. The conversation no longer felt like a correction from a superior officer. It felt more like guidance from someone who had spent a lifetime understanding the responsibility Ryan was only beginning to grasp. Marcus looked again toward the open park where the pigeons had moved farther across the lawn. You know why I come here every morning? Marcus asked. Ryan shook his head. Marcus nodded toward the stone monument standing near the center of the park. Many years ago, Marcus said, an officer who worked under my command lost his life protecting a family who lived just 3 blocks from here. Ryan listened carefully, the park sounds fading behind Marcus's words. He believed this neighborhood deserved peace, Marcus continued. So every morning I come here to remember the work we did together. Ryan followed Marcus's gaze toward the monument again. This time the distance did not feel as far. He could almost imagine the names engraved on the plaque. Marcus looked back toward him. That officer once told me something I never forgot, Marcus said. Ryan leaned slightly closer. Marcus spoke slowly, the words measured and clear. He said the badge is not a symbol of authority. It is a reminder of who we are responsible for protecting. Ryan looked around the park again, seeing the families, the joggers, the children chasing pigeons across the grass. The lesson Marcus was sharing was not about rules or authority. It was about perspective. Ryan nodded slowly, the understanding settling in deeper now. I will remember that, he said quietly. Marcus gave a warm smile. The park breeze moved through the trees once more, rustling the leaves in soft waves of sound. For a moment neither man spoke again. The pigeons lifted briefly into the air before settling near the monument in the center of the field, and the peaceful rhythm of the morning continued around them, as though the park itself understood that something important had just been passed from one generation of officer to the next. The morning light continued to settle gently across Riverside Memorial Park as the conversation between Marcus Bennett and Ryan Carter slowly reached its quiet end. The breeze carried the soft rustle of leaves through the tall maple branches, and the sunlight reflected across the open grass where the pigeons had gathered once again near the center of the field. Marcus remained seated on the bench with the calm patience of someone who had learned long ago that meaningful moments rarely needed to be rushed. Ryan stood nearby, his posture no longer rigid with authority, but balanced with a quiet humility that had not been there when the morning first began. For a moment neither man spoke. The sounds of the park moved around them like a living backdrop. A distant lawn mower hummed from a nearby street. A group of children laughed as they chased each other across the walking path. Somewhere behind them a dog barked once before being gently called back by its owner. Ryan finally took a slow breath and looked toward the stone monument standing near the center of the park. From where he stood now, the bronze plaque was catching the sunlight more clearly than before. He took a few steps toward it, almost without thinking, drawn by a quiet curiosity that had been growing since Marcus first mentioned it. The engraved names were arranged in careful lines across the metal surface, each one representing an officer who had once worn the same uniform Ryan wore now. Ryan read them slowly, his eyes moving from one name to the next with growing respect. Near the bottom of the plaque a small inscription had been carved beneath the list of names. It read, "In honor of those who protected this community with courage, patience, and service." Ryan stood there for a moment, absorbing the message before turning back toward the bench. Marcus was watching him with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the morning. Ryan returned slowly, his footsteps quieter now as if he understood the space around him differently. "I had walked past that monument many times," Ryan said thoughtfully, "but I never really stopped to read it." Marcus nodded gently. "Sometimes we move too quickly to notice the things that matter most," he replied. Ryan glanced down briefly at the badge pinned to his uniform before lifting his eyes again. "I will not forget what you said today," he added quietly. Marcus smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening with warmth. "That is all anyone can hope for," he said. The pigeons fluttered once more across the grass, as if responding to the calm rhythm of the park returning fully to normal. Marcus leaned forward slightly and rested both hands on the top of his cane before slowly standing from the bench. His movements were steady and measured, the posture of someone who carried many years, but also a quiet strength that had not faded with time. Ryan instinctively stepped aside to give him space. Marcus looked out across the park one last time, watching the families, the joggers, and the children moving through the open field without worry. "This place used to be very different," Marcus said softly. "But when people work together long enough, they can build something peaceful." Ryan followed his gaze, seeing the park through a new understanding. Marcus turned toward the walking path that led toward the street beyond the trees. Before taking his first step, he paused and looked back toward Ryan. "Take care of this place," Marcus said calmly. Ryan nodded without hesitation. "I will, Chief Bennett." Marcus gave a small approving nod and began walking slowly down the path, his cane tapping lightly against the pavement with each step. The pigeons returned once more to the patch of grass near the bench where the last crumbs had fallen earlier that morning. Ryan remained standing beside the empty bench for several seconds, watching the older man disappear between the trees. The badge on his chest felt slightly heavier now, not as a burden, but as a reminder. Around him Riverside Memorial Park continued its peaceful morning